Penn State lands a new commitment out of the transfer portal. It is former Texas A&M defensive end Enai White. Penn State needed defensive linemen, and they got one that could start for them next season.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Always, thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. My name is Zach Seyko. I'm your host of this live show as we are reacting to Enai White committing to Penn State out of the transfer portal. Massive get in terms of value, in terms of potential, because Enai White hasn't exactly shown what he is capable of. Committed to Texas A&M, was one of the best recruits in the class of 2022 from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So this is a homecoming for him. It makes a lot of sense for both parties, for Penn State and for Enai White. Since this is a live reaction, of course, I'm looking for your questions, comments, reactions here. Penn State needed a defensive lineman. And I believe this is Abdul Carter's replacement. And the hope is that Enai White becomes Denai Dennis Sutton's partner in crime, if you will. Because the jury is still out on whether or not Denai Dennis Sutton is going to return to the team. Now, when we get that confirmation, right? You want to speak it into existence. But this makes the move all that much better because Penn State just does not have any defensive line depth going into next season. Between Abdul Carter has not declared for the draft just yet, but he's going to be a top 10, conservatively a top 15 NFL draft pick in 2025. So I am not, I will hold my reservations that he returns to Penn State for a 2025 season because he's going to go off to the NFL. It makes a lot of sense for him. You can't pass that up. So you're losing Abdul Carter because of the prospect of being drafted highly in the NFL draft. Then you're losing players because of eligibility, and that's in the interior of the defensive line and on the edge where they need players. Smith Vilbert out of eligibility. Amin Vanover out of eligibility. Denai Dennis Sutton could go on to the NFL. That remains to be seen. Then you look at defensive tackle. Zane Durant could go off to the NFL if he decides. We will see. I think he's a player that could come back and it would help his draft stock. But you never know. Devon J. Thomas out of eligibility. Keziah Izzard out of eligibility. And then a player like an Alonzo Ford, he actually has one more year of eligibility, but he's hurt. And he's going to be returning from injury, hopefully sooner rather than later. But you just have so many question marks in terms of what can the defensive line look like. But now you offer some reassurance here with Enai White. Let's talk about Enai White specifically. But that's why this move is so impactful, because Penn State needed a defensive end that was capable of starting, not just a rotational player. I know what's lying ahead. Max Granville, Jalen Harvey, but those guys, their impact, their better days of football are still a little further down the road. I know we've seen a lot from Max Granville in terms of a player that shouldn't even be at Penn State right now. He is supposed to be a senior in high school, but he still needs to be a player that continues to develop. You can't just thrust him into starting action. This is a player, and Enai White gives you the ability to bridge and continue to allow Max Granville to develop rather than just throwing him out there and just hoping for the best. And I also don't, Jordan Mayer, another player that they got from the transfer portal a while ago, that's another one of those situations where Penn State plays the long game. Davian Collins is another example of that. Nolan Rucci, a player that just still needs to develop, and Penn State's doing that. Players that they get out of the transfer portal more often than not, it's not every time. I'm not afraid to admit that. More often than not, they are succeeding as opposed to outright failing. Okay, Dante Cephas, I get that, but you look at other players that have succeeded, right? Penn State seems to be doing well through the transfer portal here. Enai White, you're going off of potential, the fact that Penn State had a prior relationship here because Penn State was one of his top schools and then he ultimately went out of state to go to Texas A&M. But Matt, like I said, massive get in terms of value, and he has to be able to prove it. He's already developed into that college ready. Texas A&M did an excellent job of developing him physically. It's all about the technique because he has the stature to play Big Ten football. I mean, he was in the SEC, right? 6'4", 6'5" now, and weighing 250 pounds, just dealing with some injuries too. So there's just a lot of it. If Penn State can tap into this potential, he and Denai Dennis-Sutton can be an incredible 1-2 punch for this upcoming season. Penn State still has a lot of needs on the defensive line. You have to be able to get Denai Dennis-Sutton back. Assuming that he does come back, just because that's the hope, and he would start for another season, and he can continue to build that draft stock. Same thing with Zane Durant. But now you have those three, hypothetically speaking, of course, as your confirmed front four for the most part. Again, hypothetically speaking, so maybe I shouldn't say confirmed there. But that is a good start to continue to rebuild this defense for a 2025 season, when you have Andy Kotelnicki came back, Drew Aller coming back, you had Kyron Hudson in the portal. Penn State's really checking a lot of boxes here. It's a lot of work. That was never the question. That was never a question, that it was going to be a lot of work in the offseason to rebuild this team, or reload, I should say. Reload so that you don't have to rebuild. And Penn State's doing that. Penn State is doing that, where they're avoiding a situation where they have to go into rebuild mode because they are reloading. It just takes a lot of work here. So their work's not finished. Enai White is going to be most likely Abdul Carter's replacement. Does he give you Abdul Carter type of production right out of the gate? We will have to wait and see. I can't make a prediction as far as, okay, how much better is Enai White since recovering from that injury? Because he didn't play a whole lot these past couple of seasons. He didn't play a lot. He played in a few games, logged, I think, about almost a dozen snaps late in the season, but he wasn't playing much at Texas A&M. Coaching changes. He committed to a Jimbo Fisher, and then Mike Elko took over, right? So a change in regime at Texas A&M. So this makes sense for Enai White to do this, and for Penn State. Deion Barnes has shown that he is really good at developing defensive ends. So I have the optimism that Enai White will live up to that ranking that he had once upon a time. This was a consensus top 50 player in the nation. Honestly, in terms of background, reminds me a lot of A.J. Harris. A.J. Harris went to Georgia, SEC program, for whatever reason, just did not work out. Wanted to find a new home, landed at Penn State. They had a prior recruiting relationship, and it all worked out for the best. And we are seeing A.J. Harris turn into that superstar caliber player. Enai White, different circumstance in terms of he dealt with a long-term injury. And it takes a long term to recover, not only just to get back on the football field, but to get back to playing speed, to get back to that level of confidence, that you have that security that, okay, I can make this move. I'm not afraid to get hit this way, and not second guessing yourself in the back of your mind. And I'm not saying that's what Enai White is dealing with, but you almost have to get back to that level of comfortability to play at a top level. But he has all of the physical traits. I would say that in terms of technique, because he was a raw athlete coming out of high school, and depending on how much Texas A&M was able to work with him, this is where Deion Barnes steps in. This is the significance of Deion Barnes and why he was promoted to the full-time defensive line coach as early as he was, as young into his career, because he has shown not only as a recruiter, but as a coach, fundamentals, developing players. Abdul Carter went from linebacker to defensive end, and in that span of 6 months, went from a really quality linebacker, who probably would have been selected in the first round off of just athleticism and potential alone, but he got better as a defensive end. Deion Barnes deserves credit for that. Chop Robinson, the progress of Denai Dennis-Sutton, all of these things combined. I am confident this works out. I am confident this works out. Now, Abdul Carter set the bar really high. So I'm not here to sit here and tell everybody that is watching and listening that Enai White automatically becomes the heir apparent to Abdul Carter. But what he does become is an instant starter at defensive end, a veteran player, somebody with SEC experience. This isn't somebody from the group of five that you just kind of have to hope for the best, that they can adjust to the level of competition. No, they know the level of competition. Playing in not only the Power Four, but the Big Ten and the SEC are the Big Two. These are the two best conferences in all of college football. If you want to debate me who's better, I think it's the Big Ten for a small, very, very minuscule margin. But my point being is that Enai White isn't going to be shocked by anything that he sees. He knows all of this. He knows how it operates. And I think being closer to home, there is nothing but positives here. There is nothing but positives here for Penn State and Enai White himself as a player. Looking for your questions, comments, reactions. Still need to talk about what Penn State can do in the transfer portal. So they gain this commitment, but it looks like another player they needed on the defensive line is going away from them. We're going to talk about it more on the other side of this break. And again, looking for your questions and comments right after this. And today's show is brought to you by Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That's definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is the personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place. Whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even your goals you want to hit this year, Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. You can cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. All you got to do is go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That is rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money at rocketmoney.com/lockedon. And let's jump back into the conversation and welcome all of you into the conversation with this live reaction. Mary says, great news. Is there any news yet on picking up more receivers through the portal? So yes, this isn't just relative to, yes, it's nice to get a defensive lineman. I've argued that Penn State honestly needs defensive linemen more than they need receivers. And it's depending on who you ask, it's a 1A, 1B type of situation. Penn State, it is in communications with other wide receivers. It has been a struggle. Now, again, Kyron Hudson, step in the right direction, but this isn't that game-changing player that fans, and I'm sure Penn State would like to have hoped for, but I'm not saying that if Penn State says, oh, well, we need a consolation here, so we're going to go with Kyron Hudson. They wouldn't have recruited him out of the transfer portal if they didn't want him to commit. Let me preface that. However, I think of players like an Eric Singleton Jr. from Georgia Tech or a Casey Concepcion from NC State, that in Penn State's case, they just really need that with what they're losing in a Tyler Warren. And I know Tyler Warren's a tight end, and these are wide receivers, but my point being is that Penn State's passing game, I'd argue that 90% of it has been run through Tyler Warren. So what Penn State's going to do is get a collection of wide receivers that are all capable individually. Are they that superstar playmaker? Not necessarily, but if you have a collection of them, if you have a Kyron Hudson who is above average, Trey Wallace above average, and then you still get, because Amari Evans isn't finished developing. I still think he has better football ahead of him. You are losing Julian Fleming, and that's what Kyron Hudson's really replacing Julian Fleming when you think about it. But Caden Saunders recovering from injury and potentially returning for a postseason run. We shall see how that happens, but you can expect him to come back. Tyseer Denmark is developing nicely. Marcus Hagans is doing phenomenal work through recruiting for what it's worth, but that's going to take time. Not a lot of people care about how Penn State's wide receivers are going to look in 27, 28. The short answer is yes, they're still recruiting wide receivers. I think they did miss on Eric Rivers. That was somebody that they were targeting heavily, and a player that would have been a nice addition. Eric Rivers and Kyron Hudson together, that is a massive win, but I don't think Penn State is going to be able to land both of them, unfortunately, here in this case. Yes, he is committed to Georgia Tech, so there's that confirmation. Malachi Fields was somebody else that, because of the relationship Marcus Hagans had previously over at Virginia, UVA, that would have made a lot of sense. And 6'4", 220 pounds, it'd be nice to have another big, that big body type of receiver, especially in the red zone for Drew Aller to throw to, but the way everything's aligning, I wouldn't count Penn State out of it, but Notre Dame seems to be the leading suitor there. White is good. I hope they really get some defensive tackles. They need at least two. Remember, the transfer portal is fluid because I completely agree. I think they need David Blay, and let me mention Bear Alexander here too, because again, your comments help drive the conversation. So even though Bear Alexander wasn't mentioned, I did allude to that before I went to break. Bear Alexander, per Oregon On 3 Insiders, is projected to go figure, Oregon. It was down to Oregon, SMU, and Penn State. He's taken his visits, done due diligence. And Oregon insiders feel confident enough to put a crystal ball in or a projection or whatever have you for Bear Alexander to go to the Ducks. And in the scheme of everything, Bear Alexander, because I talked to my counterpart Spencer over at Locked On Ducks and said, hey, you can have him. Because Bear Alexander quit on his team. And this is the second time that he's in the transfer portal. He said, I'm going to use my red shirt. He opted out of the rest of the season for USC because allegedly he wasn't playing enough. So he basically boycotted the team. And does Penn State really need that? Because what happens if Bear Alexander does that again? What happens if you're looking for an impact type of player? Alexander does not view himself as a rotational player, and neither do these other schools. But at USC, he wasn't living up to the standards. He was a second string rotational tackle, defensive tackle, and said, all right, I'm leaving. I'm leaving the team, and I'm going to enter the portal. As talented as he is, imagine that scenario at Penn State. Penn State as another hypothetical national championship contender. And one of your starting defensive linemen casually does not like the amount of playing time or the way that he's being coached or whatever have you, and opts out for the rest of the season and says, I'm going to go into the transfer portal. Do you want to take that risk? Do you want to take that challenge? I don't deny that Bear Alexander is an extremely talented player, but Penn State's going to have to find different options there. I like David Blay. I think we talk about how Enai White is from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. David Blay, who honestly could have gone into the NFL draft. Maybe he should have. Who knows? But defensive tackle, and would be another starting caliber player. Veteran, I would liken his situation to maybe an Arnold Ebiketie. Now, I know Ebiketie played defensive end, but that's a player that could have a similar impact in terms of veteran leadership and actual ability and game-changing ability. And he's from the area, and he doesn't carry the same baggage that Bear Alexander does. So David Blay, that's what really puts Penn State as a transfer portal winner. Right now, they're winning the offseason because, okay, did you get Andy Kotelnicki back? Check. Did you get Drew Aller back? Check. Did you get at least one wide receiver? Veteran, can at least give you something. Can he make an impact? Can he start? Check in Kyron Hudson. And now you have Enai White, starting defensive end. Check. You still got Denai Dennis-Sutton, Zane Durant. For what it's worth, Zachy Wheatley, right? I'm thinking all of that through. There's still a lot of needs here. They need somebody to replace KJ Winston. They're looking for some linebacker depth if they can get that. Defensive tackle and wide receiver are the biggest priorities, but there's still some. What about Nicholas Singleton? What about Katron Allen? So it's a long list. It is a long list, but Penn State will certainly figure it out. They've won every single one of them. Of the first four that they've accomplished, they've won. We are Penn State. Yes, we are. Any linebackers lining up? It doesn't seem that way, not at the moment. Penn State's linebacker room. So, okay, Kobe King is another one. Is Kobe King going to return, or is he going to go off to the NFL? That remains to be seen. I would like to see Kobe King back. I think he's still in a spot where he can boost his draft stock, but honestly, he did have his breakout season. He did have a breakout campaign that, compared to a season ago, he is in a much better position to where his draft status is now. And can it get that much better? I think it could, but if he's content with it, like a KJ Winston is okay with going into the draft now as more likely a third, fourth round, who knows, a fifth round pick. But he's okay with that. He's accepted that. Kobe King might be in a similar situation. If you can get Kobe King to stick around, then you still have Tony Rojas. And I know Tony Rojas didn't have the breakout season that everybody was anticipating him to have. You can definitely expect that next season. Tony Rojas just needs to fine-tune some technique, some play recognition, because he has all the athleticism. I think year 3 is going to be, I mean, he's not only going to get slightly better. I think he's going to make the jump in year 3. But the linebacker room, I don't think, is in shambles by any stretch of the imagination. Anthony Specka, talented freshman that saw some time. Tamir Robinson has received a lot of high praise and was dealing with some bumps and bruises throughout the season. Dom DeLuca still comes back. So you still have a lot of depth at the linebacker room, and Penn State is still more likely to run that 4-2-5. They're going to get a hybrid player, it seems like, to replace KJ Winston. So I don't have any concerns at linebacker right now. Could it be better? Yes, but I'm not saying. Ask me about defensive line and wide receiver. My tune is completely different. Happy to see it's snowy in State College. What's the local forecast? So for tomorrow, it's supposed to be 29 degrees and with a real feel of 15 with 15-mile-an-hour wind gusts. And there could be some on and off snow showers, but other than that, it's just going to be ice cold. It is going to be ice cold for a team from Dallas, Texas, that it was 70 degrees just a couple of days ago. This seems like a good pickup, but it's another transfer from Pennsylvania coming back to Pennsylvania. I'd like to see them do something we haven't seen 10 times. If it works, it works. And there is that in, so that's where we'll finish up before we go back to the comments and talk about some other storylines and everything else. For Penn State, you would like players to not look at Penn State as a backup option, and I completely agree with that. I would still rather Penn State eventually have the ability of these players than not have them at all. So yes, Nolan Rucci and Julian Fleming and now Enai White, all these players that should have committed to Penn State originally, but it's better late than never to have them on the roster, to have them on the team. But hopefully what this does, if you continue, okay, Enai White pans out, then it's not just about transfers anymore. You have to continue, you have to reset the standard. So Penn State standards are that, okay, this is where running backs go, defensive ends, safeties, cornerbacks, defensive backs, if you will, to combine them all together. Linebacker, yes. But my point is that wide receivers aren't constantly coming to Penn State like they are in LSU. Because over recent memory, high school recruits are thinking about Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. And for Penn State, Saquon Barkley. So you have to kind of weigh all of that. Oh, Penn State doesn't get wide receivers because Penn State doesn't have the brand that they develop wide receivers. But look at Saquon Barkley. Look at Miles Sanders. I know Miles Sanders isn't working out now, but second round of the draft. And Journey Brown before the health conditions. And now Nicholas Singleton, now Katron Allen. So it's more about recent memory. Drew Aller might break the quarterback trend. He should. Look at Ethan Grunkemeyer. Top 10 quarterback. Look at Troy Hune. It's already resetting the standard that, oh, Penn State is a place I can go as a quarterback and develop into a future NFL prospect. So if Penn State wants to do that and become a place where wide receivers can go and trust that they will make it to the NFL, and it's not every 5 years that you get a Jahan Dotson, a KJ Hamler, a Chris Godwin, there's a gap. You notice I'm naming 1, 2, Allen Robinson, Chris Godwin, KJ Hamler, Jahan Dotson. In terms of elite wide receivers, you don't have, with Penn State, you have a consecutive streak of running backs. Not at wide receiver, certainly not at quarterback. Trace McSorley will be in the hearts and minds of Penn State fans for the rest of their lives, and he will say that Penn State was the greatest place. But when you're talking about high school recruiting and transfer portal recruiting too, did they get to the NFL? How highly did they get drafted? That's more so what matters. So Penn State has to be able to change that. They have to be able to readjust that. Still looking for your comments, questions, reactions. We'll talk some more transfer portal stuff, other prospects that intrigue me. And it's not over. The transfer portal is a fluid situation. So a prospect that's not in today could be in tomorrow. And just because Penn State doesn't have all the boxes checked doesn't mean that they won't in the future. We'll talk about it more on the other side of this break. Today's live show is also brought to you by Game Time. It's the holiday season, and there's nothing better than creating fond memories by going to live events, whether that's concerts, comedy and theater events, obviously sporting events. But create those fond memories with Game Time. Game Time is focused on togetherness this holiday season, and that means when you bring people together at live events, the experience is that much better, and it can be the perfect gift. Remind everybody that if you need a last-second idea. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks, and that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier than before. Game Time Picks filters out all the fluff. So you will only see the greatest deals on the greatest seats, and you don't have to waste time searching through thousands and thousands of tickets. We have Game Time CO pulled up right now. You can go to the Game Time app or go to gametime.co on your browser. And I have tickets for Penn State versus SMU college football playoff pulled up. And the Game Time picks are already sorted for me. If you're looking for a last second super deal, all in pricing, so there's no surprise fees at checkout. $94 for these tickets. Lower end zone section SK row 23, $94. That's with fees included. If you're looking for the lowest price to get into the game, upper sideline section EAU row 79, all in pricing, $36 per ticket. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. And we'll wrap up the conversation here in this final segment. Catch back up in the comments. All right, we're going to wide receivers here. Sorry, but I'm not impressed with Marcus Hagen's work thus far. Very subpar recruiting and coaching to boot. Sorry, but he needs to go if that wide receiver room is going to transcend. Simple as that. Okay, I'll try to answer that because I actually don't think Marcus Hagen's is directly the problem. I think that Penn State is dealing with a bunch of different things, misconceptions, previous success not up to the standard of wide receivers, as I have pointed out. But he is making progress. So the wide receivers, Trey Wallace is better. They didn't get much. Remember who you're also dealing with, an offensive coordinator too. So this is one season of Andy Kotelnicki. What about the second season? If Penn State was still having that many struggles at wide receiver, I don't think they would get a player like a Kyron Hudson. I don't think they'd be in the conversation with other guys. He's blanking my mind. Malachi Rogers. So Malachi Rogers. My point being is that you're going to have to give Marcus Hagen's more time. 4 recruits in the class of 2025 and getting some players out of the transfer portal. So it's a step in the right direction. I think the turning point is Tyseer Denmark going to be that breakthrough? That's where you kind of get your answer on, is Marcus Hagen's working out or is he not? But he rebounded very well in the class of 2025 recruiting, but the impact of those players will not be felt until 27, 28. I get the frustration, I get the concern, but he's also having to deal with what Penn State's wide receiver room was before he took it over. So he's cleaning up a lot of mess here. See, now I'm catching up because people in real time reacting to Bear Alexander here. Bear Alexander is not that big of a deal and does not fit in with Penn State. Never thought he did. It's a cultural thing. I just think about that. USC was not in a position to win a national title, so at the end of the day, it doesn't affect them. But for Penn State, that can easily go, the expectation is going to be to go 11-1. If things go well, 12-0, right? The expectation is Penn State wants to go 11-1, 12-0, contend for the Big Ten title again next season. And a guy that you bring in and are going to pay a significant amount of NIL, and they happen to quit or be difficult in the middle of the season, is not worth the distraction. I say, and that has nothing to do with Bear Alexander specifically. I would say the same thing about any other player that has questions about their past playing time. Wide receiver should not be an issue for a team whose head coach cut his teeth as a wide receivers coach. Well, good point. James Franklin was a position coach at wide receiver, but now, so James Franklin's role is different. Being a head coach, being a CEO of the program, it's coming back around because they're great. They're elite in other position groups. Running back. How many other programs can say that they are tight end U, or at least contend for tight end U? Because I know that Iowa people and Notre Dame people will disagree with me. Penn State's currently tight end U. Go look at all the results. And most recent with Tyler Warren was a Heisman contender as a tight end. Can't say that about any other program. Presently, Penn State is tight end U. But Saquon Barkley, Miles Sanders, right? Journey Brown, Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen. And then eventually Quentin Martin, Corey Smith, right? Everything is setting up nicely at running back. Drew Aller is starting to reset the expectations at quarterback. You have Ethan Grunkemeyer waiting. You have Troy Hune waiting. And Beckham Kritza, for what it's worth, he needs a lot of development. He needs a lot of work. But if he puts in the work, the intel that I've heard, if he figures it out, he can be one of the better quarterback prospects, one of the better diamonds in the rough that anybody's ever seen. That's why Penn State is taking a chance on him, because he has the potential, but he needs the development. He needs the coaching. So Penn State, it's not going to be perfect at every position group, but how many other programs can say, yeah, we develop tight ends, running backs, defensive ends, linebacker U historically, and defensive backs. Penn State is really good at a lot of other positions. It's just wide receiver. You can't be perfect at all of them. The positions we are not well known for can be had in the transfer portal. A disaffected quarterback, wide receiver from a QB, wide receiver school, that can be had through the portal. And that's what the transfer portal, at least I don't like the transfer portal in NIL, but we need it here, and it's here to stay. It's not going anywhere, and it's only going to change. It's only going to change. So you either adapt or you get left behind. I'm not here to debate the transfer portal or anything else, but you can accelerate. So the transfer portal, since it's college football's version of free agency, you don't need 3, 4, 5 years to go and rebuild. You can be successful now. You can take that step forward now. Whereas, okay, Marcus Hagans is putting together this incredible class of 2025 wide receivers, and you have to wait for their impact to be felt in 27, 28, 29, whatever have you. It's a long time out. But that's what Penn State is doing. It's building a foundation, and then it's going to get the complementary pieces through the portal. So that's what the portal does. That's why the portal is so beneficial. And for Ohio State, I don't think people understand this enough. If it wasn't for NIL and the transfer portal, this team wouldn't even be in the playoff. This team was going to be decimated because all those guys were going to go off to the NFL. They got a Caleb Downs, right? So it can either save and preserve your program, because then Ohio State would have really had to work to rebuild. Instead, you can now reload. And that's what Penn State needs to do. They just need to continue to reload so that they avoid a rebuild. And that's what it can be. We are a great transfer portal pickup. Indeed, Kevin. Thank you. Thank you for joining the live show. Penn State isn't going to pay up for anyone in the portal like Nike or Ohio State will. So far, I'm impressed with the job Franklin has done in the portal. So Penn State is in a much better situation, because when this first started, I just feel like Penn State was late to the game. And now that they're caught up, because they're top 10 according to actual sources that say that Penn State, I think they raised $13.5 million in NIL funds, and that's 7th best in the country. So now Penn State can be competitive on the NIL front. And then you're not as far behind, because it was, Ohio State is spending roughly $20 million or more to construct this roster. And I think at the time, Penn State was barely reaching 10 million or under 10 million. Somebody else can say otherwise in the comments, but Penn State is now competitive on the national landscape with NIL. And then they can be more competitive in the transfer portal and recruiting. I've just heard from other peers covering Penn State and just like the word from recruits, this saying was floated around that if all things were equal, meaning NIL or everything else, Penn State was recruiting the best. That Penn State had the best pitch, had the best, at least offerings in terms of development and system and coaching and caring about who they are as a player and as a person. But sometimes it is, I don't blame any prospect or any player when Quinn Ewers is rumored to have a $4 million offer on the table to transfer out of Texas, how many people in this chat would take that offer? $4 million to play one more season of college football. It's tough to go up against. So you have to be competitive, adapt, or get left behind. I'm calling it next year we see a six tight end formation. And honestly, Andy Kotelnicki's not against it. Andy Kotelnicki is not against it. He will do that. Whatever it takes to win. He jokes about, hey, if we need 10 offensive linemen, we'll do it. Meaning that a quarterback and then they use 10 offensive linemen to block. It's not going to happen. That's not going to. But Andy Kotelnicki is not against running. You could see 3 tight end formations more often. Khalil Dinkins, Luke Reynolds, and Andrew Rapplier, once he's healthy again, are too good to keep off of the football field all at one time. And they expect, they just, think about that for a moment. Penn State just got, in a crowded tight end room as it is, there's Joey Schlaffer in there, Jerry Cross is in the portal. But the 3 I just named, Joey Schlaffer, and they got 3 tight end commits in the class of 2025. I thought they would only get 1. And they ended up getting the best of them all, at least right now in the moment. I'll let them figure that out. But Andrew Olish to commit when that was the concern. Are they going to be able to get and retain more than 1 tight end recruit in the class of 2025? And they did just that. So Andy Kotelnicki is not beholden to, well, I need to run 4 wide receiver sets. I need to run 2 tight end sets. I need to run 2 running backs. He will do whatever it takes. When Cam Wallace was healthy, they were running 3 running back sets. That's why I like Andy Kotelnicki, because the football, this is not socially acceptable in football. He don't care. He does not care. Who would have thought that 3 years ago, but the offensive line will be the top position room and linebacker will be the room most lacking? That's an interesting one. I want to try to get to all the comments because we're a little bit over time here. I had Penn State's depth chart pulled up. So Penn State's offensive line is actually in a really good spot. That is a testament to Phil Trautwein. But I think of all the players that hypothetically could and should come back. Drew Shelton should come back. I think he could use another year in college. Vanga Ioane, I think, is the closest to going to the NFL of guys that could leave early. Nick Dawkins can actually return, and I'd be okay with that. That's your starting center and your captain. Why not? Sal Wormley has to go to the NFL. He's out of eligibility. And Nolan Rucci has hit his stride. That's an example of player through the portal, works out. Nolan Rucci is not a liability. They do not need to help him on the right side. And then you have Anthony Donko recovering from injury and will return. Javen Williams, Alex Birchmeyer, we'll see. Give them spring football and see if they can develop, because that's year 3. That is when you figure out whether a player is going to live up to the expectations or they are what they are. Year 3 is the turning point for anybody. College, pro, high school, honestly. And that's the case in point. JB Nelson could return. Did I mention Cooper Cousins? I'll mention him again because I think Cooper Cousins should start on any offensive line going into next season, not just Penn State's. I think he could start at almost any other school. Penn State's in a really good spot with its offensive line. Tight end room has a lot of depth. Defensive line is a work in progress. I like the secondary for what it's worth too, despite losing Jalen Reed and KJ Winston. Jalen Reed's out of eligibility for anybody that did not know, but you get AJ Harris back. You get Zion Tracy back. They should get Jalen Kimber back. I don't expect him to leave to do anything. So Penn State just needs to focus on the main priorities of wide receiver and defensive line, and then see if they can get some of those other complementary players to help out. But they're in an excellent spot. And quarterback. Drew Aller's back. Ethan Grunkemeyer will be an excellent quarterback too. I know they're losing Bo Prabula, but that had to happen because he is a starter, but he's not better than Drew. And let's see, do I have any more comments? We'll finish up with this one. Franklin is smart. He won't waste 1/3 of the NIL revenue sharing money on a single player like Nike or Texas will. You have to be strategic. You have to, because Penn State is in a position where it has to be. And I think Penn State makes a lot of good chess moves. So they aren't going to spend just, and they pitch the whole encompassing experience. you're going to get an education, you're going to get a degree, you're going to be in a place, because what I hear from Penn State players and Penn State players through other people is that the experience matters above all else, and that they care about me as a player, they care about my best interests. It's more than just football, where for some of these other programs, it's a football factory. And you're just looked at based on your jersey number and your statistics. And I think that carries a lot of value in a day where it's just about the dollar signs. It's just about the results. And that's why Penn State is still in the national category, right? They're contending for a college football championship this season and very well will next season. That says a lot for a program that does not have the number one NIL reserves. They don't have the number one NIL funds. I think that says a lot about Penn State that can't be the team that spends $25 million. But they're working, they're gaining ground in other spots. We went 40 minutes. I'm going to have to end it here. But I thank you so much, as this conversation covered a lot. Enai White talked about other transfer portal players, needs, targets, and what Penn State's doing on the NIL recruiting front and coaching staff, how the position groups are turning out. Thank you so much for your comments, your questions, your reactions to this. If you're not already, become an everydayer. Subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Really appreciate it if you left a like on this episode, share it with friends and family. My name is Zach Seyko. Thank you so much for joining the show, and we'll talk to you more as Penn State plays SMU in the college football playoff, and it will be very exciting. We'll react to it and have so much more content around it based on one way or another. I have Penn State winning, for those who don't know, 35-21 tomorrow. We'll see if my prediction holds true. Thank you again for checking out this live episode.